The house on Birchwood Lane was mine before my son was born, before his mother and I had even chosen his name, before we'd done anything except love each other and believe that was enough to build a life on. I bought it in 1989 with money I'd saved working double shifts at the freight yard, and my wife June added what she'd kept in a savings account since she was 19 years old. We didn't have much. The kitchen needed new flooring. The back porch sagged on one side. The furnace made a sound in February like something dying, but it was ours and we fixed it piece by piece, summer by summer, until it became the kind of house where everything had a story. The dining room table, we carried it up 3 flights of stairs from a church sale in the rain. The oak tree in the backyard. My son Kyle planted that when he was 7 for a school project, and it never died the way we all expected it to. The workshop in the basement, that was mine. Every Saturday morning for 30 years, I went down those stairs and made things with my hands. A toy chest for Kyle, a rocking horse, a cabinet for June's good dishes. After she passed, I kept going down there. I didn't know what else to do with my hands. Kyle was 41 when he got married. I was glad for him. His wife his wife Sheila, came into his life like a sudden weather change, the kind where the air pressure shifts before you understand what's coming. She was polished and sure of herself, which I didn't hold against her. Confidence isn't a crime. And Kyle loved her with the particular helplessness of a man who had waited a long time to love anyone. They moved in together into her apartment downtown, and for a while things were fine. We had Sunday dinners. I drove an hour each way and sat at a table that always felt slightly too clean, with placemats that matched the curtains, that matched the throw pillows, and I ate whatever Sheila had made and said it was good, which it usually was. She was good at surfaces. Everything looked right. I just didn't always feel easy inside it. Then Sheila got pregnant and everything moved fast. They needed more space. They'd been looking at houses for months, Kyle told me, but prices had gone through the roof and the neighborhoods they liked were out of reach. He didn't ask me anything directly. He just said it the way you say something when you're hoping the other person will offer. I offered. I told them they could have Birchwood Lane, not rent it, have it. I'd been talking to my accountant, a quiet man named Franklin, who'd done my taxes since the 80s and who gave advice the way good doctors do, plainly and without drama. He suggested I transfer the deed, for tax reasons, while I was still in good health. It made sense on paper. I told myself it made sense in my heart, too. I moved into the apartment above the garage at my property outside town, a place I'd owned for 11 years and rarely talked about. I'll explain that in a moment. For the first few months, things were fine. Kyle called on Sundays. I drove out to see the baby, a boy they named Cooper, and yes, I am aware that's not a common grandfather name to use, but it's what they chose and I respected it. I sat in the living room of my own former house and held my grandson and felt something I hadn't felt since June died. Something like continuation. Then Sheila started calling less. Then Kyle started sounding distracted on the phone, the way men sound when there's a conversation happening in the background that they don't want you to know about. Then 6 months passed since I'd last been invited to Sunday dinner. I told myself it was the baby. New parents get overwhelmed. I gave them space. The call came on a Wednesday evening in March. Kyle didn't call. Sheila did, which told me something before she said a word. She was pleasant at first. She asked how I was doing, which she hadn't done in some time. Then she said, "We've been talking, and we think it's time to formalize the living situation." I said I wasn't sure what she meant. She said, "The property taxes on this house went up significantly. The maintenance is higher than we budgeted. We think it's fair that everyone contributing to this household contributes financially." I said slowly, "Are you asking me to pay rent?" She said, "We're asking you to contribute. $1,500 a month is reasonable for a room in this neighborhood." "I want to be accurate here." She said a room. Not the house, a room. The house I bought in 1989. The house where Kyle took his first steps in the kitchen doorway, grabbing the frame with both hands like he wasn't sure the floor would hold. A room, she said. $1,500 a month. I didn't say anything for a moment. I was looking out the window of the apartment above my garage, watching the light go flat over the back fields, and I was thinking about June. I was thinking about what she would have said. June had a particular way of handling things she found absurd. She didn't argue. She just got very quiet, and then she smiled, and then she waited. I said, "How much did you have in mind exactly?" Sheila said 1,500, again with a confidence that told me the number had been settled before she picked up the phone. I said, "Let me think about it." I didn't think about it. I called Franklin. Franklin said what I already knew. I had signed the house over. It was theirs. Legally, they could ask me to leave entirely. He said it gently, but he said it. I sat with that for a few days. Not because I was devastated. I want to be honest about this. I was hurt, yes, but underneath the hurt was something harder, something that had been building for a while, because this wasn't really about money. $1,500 a month was not going to change their lives. This was about the kind of power that comes from knowing someone has nowhere else to go. Sheila was smart enough to know I'd thought that house was my home. She was testing something. I decided not to give her the answer she expected. I called Kyle and asked him to meet me. Not at the house, at a diner on Route 9 that had been there since before he was born. He showed up looking tired and guilty in the particular way men look when they've been talked into something they know is wrong but haven't found the will to resist. I ordered coffee. He ordered coffee. We sat across from each other and I asked him straight, "Did you agree with what Sheila asked?" He said, "Dad, we're just trying to cover costs." I said, "Did you agree with it?" He looked at his cup. He said, "She has a point about the finances. That was what I needed to know." I said, "Okay, I understand. I won't be paying rent, though. I'm going to find somewhere else to live." He looked up. He said, "Dad, come on. We're not trying to." I said, "No, I know. I'll be fine. I actually want to take you somewhere this weekend. There's something I should have shown you a long time ago." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Saturday. I'll pick you up at 9. I didn't tell Sheila I was leaving. I packed what I needed over 2 evenings, my tools from the basement, my books, the wooden box where I keep June's letters, and the photograph of her at Crater Lake in 1994 where she's laughing at something I said and the light is hitting the water behind her and everything looks like it will last forever. I left the furniture. It was theirs anyway. Saturday morning, I pulled up to Birchwood Lane in the truck, and Kyle was waiting on the porch, looking uncertain. Sheila stood in the doorway holding Cooper on her hip. She didn't come out. I noticed that. Kyle got in the truck. He asked where we were going. I told him north, about 40 minutes. He nodded and looked out the window. We didn't talk much on the drive. I turned off the main highway onto a state road, and then onto a county road, and then onto a gravel road with a wooden gate that said Morrow Creek Holdings on a sign I'd had made in 2003. I stopped and got out and unlocked the gate the old-fashioned way with a key because that's how I'd always done it. Kyle was quiet in the new way now. We drove another half-mile up through the trees, past the maintenance barn, past the old equipment shed, and then the land opened up on both sides of the road and he could see it. 43 acres. The main building, what I call the lodge, though it's more of a large timber frame workshop and storage facility, sat at the end of the road with the hills behind it. To the left, the field where I'd been running a Christmas tree operation since 2001. To the right, the small orchard, 22 apple trees, nothing fancy, but they produced every year without fail. And at the far end of the property, visible from the road if you knew to look, the apartment building. 4 units, built in 2008. currently housing 3 long-term tenants, all paying on time, all good people. Kyle said nothing for almost a minute. Then he said, "Dad, what is this?" I said, "This is where I live, and this is what I do." He turned to look at me. His face had the expression of a man revising a story he thought he already knew the ending to. I should explain something. I was not a wealthy man when Kyle was growing up. I worked freight logistics for 22 years, and then I transitioned into small-scale property management in my mid-40s. Slowly, carefully, the way you do things when you don't have anyone to catch you if you fall wrong. June and I chose not to make money a frequent topic in our house. We paid our bills. We took one trip a year, usually driving distance. Kyle wore the same brand of sneakers his friends wore and never seemed to wonder too hard where they came from. That was intentional. June and I agreed on it. We'd both seen what happened to kids who grew up knowing they had a net. It made them soft in ways that were hard to fix later. We wanted Kyle to build his own idea of what enough looked like. What he didn't know was that I had also been building something. The Christmas tree operation started as a side project, something to do with the land I'd bought cheap because it had a drainage problem I knew how to solve. Then it turned into a business with 8 seasonal employees and contracts with 3 regional grocery chains. The apartment building came later, financed partly through the business and partly through a small commercial loan that I'd paid off in 2019. The property itself, by my last appraisal, was worth considerably more than the house on Birchwood Lane. I had never told Kyle any of this, not out of secrecy for its own sake, just because it never seemed like the right moment, and then it seemed like maybe the right moment had passed, and then I kept telling myself I'd find a way to bring it up naturally. I hadn't. We sat in the truck at the end of the gravel road, and I told him all of it. Not quickly. It took a while. He asked questions. Some of them were good questions. Some of them were the kind you ask when you're trying to understand how you missed something that was right there. At one point he said, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I said, "I didn't want you making decisions about your life based on what I had. I wanted you to find out what you were made of first." He looked at the orchard for a while. He said, "And the house? You just gave us the house?" "Even though," I said, "I gave you the house because I wanted you to have a good start. That's still true. I don't regret that part." He was quiet again. Then, "Sheila doesn't know any of this." I said, "No." He said, "She thought." I said, "I know." He said, "She thought." I said, "I know what she thought." There was a long silence. Not uncomfortable, exactly. More like the kind that follows when someone has been running in the wrong direction and finally stops. He said, "Dad, I'm sorry." I said, "I know." He said, "I should have. When she called you about the rent, I should have." I said, "Yes, you should have." We stayed out there for another hour. I showed him the maintenance barn, the equipment, the supply shed that I'd built myself over 3 summers. I introduced him to Ray, my property manager, who'd been with me since 2012 and who shook Kyle's hand and said, "Your father's one of the good ones." In the offhand way, people say things they've said many times and still mean. Kyle didn't talk much on the drive back. I didn't push it. Some things need the silence to settle before they become words. When we pulled up to Birchwood Lane, Sheila was in the front yard with Cooper, watching for the truck. She had the look of someone who had been rehearsing. Kyle got out, and I watched him walk toward her, and I watched the look on her face shift when she saw something in the way he was walking that she hadn't expected. He said something to her quietly. I couldn't hear it. She looked at the truck. She looked at Kyle. She looked at the truck. She looked at Kyle. I rolled down the window and she came over, Cooper still on her hip. Her expression was careful now, recalibrating. She said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't." She said, "I know you didn't." She said, I shouldn't have called you about the rent the way I did. I said, "You thought I was dependent." It's okay. People make decisions based on what they know. She nodded. She looked down at Cooper. He was watching me with the open, uncomplicated attention of a baby who doesn't know enough yet to be complicated. I said, "I'd like to be more involved. With him, if that's agreeable." She said, "Yes, of course." I believed her. Not completely, not yet. Trust doesn't come back the same way it left. But the door was open, and I'd learned a long time ago that sometimes open is enough to start. I told them I'd be living at Morrow Creek from now on. Kyle said he'd come out the following weekend to help me finish setting up the apartment, the one above the lodge that I've been renovating slowly for 2 years, with a kitchen window that faces east and gets the morning light in a way that reminds me of the kitchen on Birchwood Lane, circa 1994. When everything was still ahead of us and June would bring coffee to the table and the day felt long in the best possible way. I drove home alone. The road out of town runs past the old freight yard where I worked my double shifts in my 20s, and I drove past it the way I always do, without slowing down. There's a point on the county road where the tree line breaks open and you can see the hills, and on a clear evening, the light does something to the ridgeline that I've never figured out how to describe adequately. Gold, but not quite. Something older than gold. I pulled up to the gate at Morrow Creek and got out and unlocked it with my key. The sign said what it always said. The field was quiet. The apple trees stood in their rows, bare still in early spring, waiting for what was coming. I drove through and locked the gate behind me, and I walked into the lodge and put on the coffee, and I sat at the table by the east window, and I thought about Kyle's face when the land opened up around us, and about June, and about the particular look of a man understanding something about his father for the first time. It wasn't a bad thing to feel. It wasn't triumphant either. It was just true. The way things feel when the hiding is finally over. Even the hiding you did for good reasons. The coffee was ready. Outside, the last of the light was leaving the hills. I poured a cup, and I sat back down, and I let it be quiet.